24 hours. That's all she had. 24 hours between the greatest win of her life, in a stadium she'd never played in a country she'd never conquered, against a woman who had already broken her heart once this year. She hadn't slept. She hadn't really processed what had just happened in Washington, and now a plane was waiting to take her somewhere even bigger, somewhere 250,000 people had been counting the days. Because when Alex Eala landed in Toronto, something happened that hadn't happened at this tournament in 20 years. Not for Roger Federer, not for Rafael Nadal, not for Novak Djokovic, three of the greatest players who ever picked up a racket, and none of them could do what a 21-year-old from Quezon City just did before she'd even stepped on the court. Every single ticket for her opening night, gone. Sold out. The only other name attached to that feat in the last 2 decades is Serena Williams. Let that sit for a second. Not the golden era of men's tennis. Not a Grand Slam final. A first-round Wednesday night match at a WTA 1000 event. And it moved the city the way only legends usually can. So the question isn't really about tennis anymore. The question is what is actually happening here, and why does it feel bigger than the sport itself? Just hours earlier, Eala had been standing on a different court entirely, lifting a trophy in Washington after a final so brutal it needed a 20-hour rain delay just to finish. She'd beaten the world number 3. She'd become the first Filipina in history to win a WTA Tour singles title. She climbed to a career-high ranking of number 20 in the world. And along the way, in that single tournament, she had taken down 4 different top 10 opponents, including an Olympic gold medalist and a defending champion. That's not a good week. That's the kind of week players build entire careers around. The kind coaches point to for years afterward. And she didn't get to enjoy it. Not really. The final itself had been delayed so long it didn't finish until nearly midnight back home in the Philippines. And less than a day later she was airborne, headed for Toronto, carrying a trophy and an exhaustion that no highlight reel could show. What was waiting for her, there wasn't just another tournament. It was a homecoming she'd never actually had before, in a city she'd never actually lived in. The Greater Toronto area is home to more than 250,000 people of Filipino descent, the largest Filipino community anywhere in Canada, representing well over half of the entire Filipino-Canadian population in the country. They had been watching her long before Washington. They'd followed every match from Quezon City to the DC Open final, refreshing scores at strange hours, screenshotting her wins, sending them to family group chats. And when they found out she was finally coming to their city, they didn't just buy tickets, they organized. Fans began planning drives from 3, 4, even 5 hours away. People took time off work. Philippine flags were folded and packed days in advance. This wasn't casual fandom building toward a match. This was a community preparing for something they'd waited their whole lives to witness in person. One fan put it simply to local media: "She's not just a tennis player. She's our pride." And that's the sentence that should stop you, because it tells you this was never only about a scoreline. Tournament organizers watched the ticket numbers climb through the week with something close to disbelief. According to Tennis Connected, a Wednesday night session hadn't sold out completely at this event in 20 years, except for one single occasion: Serena Williams. Not the era of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic dominating the sport together, not even at their absolute peak, ever produce a sellout on a weekday first round at the stadium. Think about how strange that actually is. First round matches, especially on weekdays, are usually the quietest sessions of any tournament. Fans skip work days. The heat at the uncovered stadium keeps casual attendees away. It's normally a low-stakes, half-full atmosphere before the tournament really begins. And into that usual quiet walked a 21-year-old who had just gotten off a plane and turned it into the hottest ticket at the entire event. Coco Gauff, one of Eala's fellow players on tour, had already noticed a shift building days before Toronto. It's so great that one player can bridge the gap between a sport and a nation that hadn't really had that representation before. Gauff said, adding that Eala is simply an easy person to be a fan of. That's not a rival being polite. That's someone inside the sport recognizing that something unusual was unfolding in real time. Here's where the story starts to deepen, though. Because a sellout crowd sounds like a celebration, but underneath it was pressure most 21-year-olds never have to carry. Every single one of those tickets bought under Eala's name came with an expectation attached to it, and she would be walking onto that court running on almost no sleep, no real recovery window, and a body that had just survived one of the most physically demanding weeks of her career, because the opponent standing across the net on Wednesday night wasn't a stranger. It was Alicia Parks, the American who had beaten her badly just 7 months earlier at the Australian Open in January. Eala had actually won the first set of that match 6-love, and then it fell apart. Parks stormed back to win 6-3, 6-2, handing Eala one of the most painful losses of her season, the kind of defeat that lingers. So this wasn't just a first-round match at a new tournament. It was unfinished business, scheduled by fate, or maybe by ticket sales, on the biggest stage Eala had ever walked onto outside a Grand Slam. And that's the moment where you have to ask what actually changed in those 7 months, because the player stepping onto Sobe Stadium was not the same one who lost in Melbourne since that Australian Open defeat. Eala had gone on an absolute tear, 7 wins over top 10 opponents, a jump from outside the top 40 all the way to a career high of number 20, more than $1 million in prize money earned along the way, and now, the first Filipino player, man or woman, to ever win a WTA Tour singles title. Parks, in that same stretch, had improved too, climbing from outside the top 90 to the low 70s, a genuinely strong rise for most players. But next to Eala's trajectory, it looked almost stationary. The gap that existed in January had widened enormously by August, and everyone inside the sport knew it, including almost certainly Parks herself. Roughly 3,100 tickets moved specifically once Eala's name was attached to that Wednesday night slot, and organizers made the rematch the featured match of the entire session, not because of rankings, because of demand. Here's where the story shifts into something even more interesting than a rivalry match, though, because when reporters and fans keep asking Eala about the overwhelming support, about the flags, about the sellout crowd, she keeps refusing to make about herself. Asked about the reaction in Washington, she reframed the entire question. I think the question should be rephrased as, "What's it like to be Filipino?" She said, "Not what's it like to have fans. Not what's it like to be famous. What's it like to belong to a nation that finally gets to see itself on one of the biggest stages in the world?" That single sentence tells you more about why Toronto sold out than any statistic does. This isn't a star attracting an audience. This is a community that has been waiting decades for someone to stand at the top of a global sport and be visibly, unmistakably one of them. And there's a version of this story that stops right there, a feel-good tale about representation and a sold-out crowd. But that's not actually where the real tension lives, because underneath the celebration is a young athlete who is now being asked to carry something enormous, night after night, tournament after tournament, while her body is still recovering from the very win that created all this attention in the first place. Sobe Stadium holds 12,500 people. On a normal Wednesday night in the first round, it might be a third full. On this Wednesday night, it was set to feel, in the words of more than one fan, like a sold-out arena in Manila. In Ontario alone, the Filipino-Canadian population sits at roughly 363,000 people, and a meaningful share of them were about to converge on one stadium for one match. That's not pressure in the abstract. That's pressure with a face, with flags, with a chant of her name that had already turned Washington into something closer to a home game than a road tournament. And Eala would be walking into all of it exhausted. This is a part of the story that usually gets skipped in the highlight reels, the quiet cost behind the loud celebration. A 20-hour rain delay doesn't just push a schedule back. It wears a body down in ways that don't show up until days later. Add a transcontinental flight, minimal recovery time, and an opponent who already has a psychological win banked against you from earlier in the season, and you start to understand why this match mattered so much more than a typical first round. It wasn't just about advancing to round 2. It was a test of whether the version of Eala, who beat 4 top 10 players in Washington, could survive the toll of doing it twice back-to-back on almost no rest. And if she got past Parks, the draw only got heavier from there. The lower half of the bracket in Toronto included a reigning Wimbledon champion seeded 6th, 12-seeded Belinda Bencic, a returning Sloane Stephens as a qualifier, and, looming further down the road, a player who had already beaten Eala twice that season, including in the semifinals in Berlin, Every round represented another climb, another test of whether Washington had been a peak or a new baseline. Eala herself seemed acutely aware of the difference between those two possibilities. After winning in Washington, she didn't talk about the trophy. She talked about growth. "I ended the tournament in better shape than I started," she said. "Each match, I kept improving and kept learning things about myself. So it definitely gives me a lot of confidence." It's a quietly remarkable thing to say after the most physically brutal week of your career, that you finished it stronger than you began it. Most players would be talking about exhaustion. She was talking about discovery. And that framing matters, because it tells you how she sees pressure, not as something to survive, but as something to extract information from. That mentality is also exactly what separates her from being just a feel-good underdog story and turns her into something the entire tour is now watching closely. Because when asked about comparisons to past greats, about being called the future face of the sport, or the next big star to follow in someone else's footsteps, she pushed back on the framing entirely. "I don't want them to look at me and say, 'I want to be the next Alex Eala,'" she said. "I want them to look at me and say, 'I want to be the first me. I want to make my own path.'" That's not a throwaway line from a media training session. That's a 21-year-old explicitly rejecting the idea that her value lies in resembling someone who came before her, at the exact moment the tennis world is trying to slot her into a familiar narrative. She's telling you on the record that she sees this differently, that the story isn't supposed to rhyme with anyone else's. So here's where all of this actually lands. A sold-out stadium that hadn't happened for anyone outside Serena Williams in 20 years. A community of hundreds of thousands treating a first-round match like a national event. A rematch against a woman who beat her worst this season, arriving on almost no recovery time, with a draw that only gets harder from here. And at the center of it, a player who keeps refusing every easy narrative she's handed, who turns questions about herself into questions about her people, and who insists that whatever comes next won't be measured against anyone who came before her, whether she beat Parks that night or not. Something had already shifted permanently in how the tennis world sees her, and how an entire diaspora sees itself reflected on a global stage. Because a scoreline can be forgotten by the next tournament. A sold-out stadium built entirely on hope community, and a plane ticket landed hours before kickoff. That's the kind of thing nobody forgets.